This video is the fourth video in the complex numbers set of videos. In particular, in this video, we're going to be looking at adding and subtracting complex numbers. The basic step-by-step guide for both adding and subtracting complex numbers is first of all adding the real parts, second of all adding the imaginary parts, and then finally combining the results of adding the real parts and adding the imaginary parts to form a new complex number. You can see all of this laid out on page 9 of the notes. However, I'm going to explain this more by going through the examples on page 10. On page 10, in example 4.1, it says, write the following complex numbers in the form a plus bi. The first one is 4 plus 5i plus 2 plus 3i. Here, we're going to be looking at the real part, which is 4, and the second real part, which is 2. We're going to be looking at the 5i and 3i. Adding the real parts, which you can see here in blue, we have 4 plus 2, which will give us 6. And adding 5i and 3i will give us 8. So we have 8i. The new complex number formed is 6 plus 8i. B, we're looking at 8 plus 2i minus 7 minus 6i. Here we have the 2i and the 6i as our imaginary parts and the 8 and the 7 as our real parts. First thing we have to do though is get rid of the bracket. Here the bracket with the minus will mean that the sign on the 7 and the 6 will change. Therefore we'll end up with 8 plus 2i minus 7 plus 6i. Adding the real parts together, we have 8 and 7, meaning we'll end up with 15. And adding the imaginary parts together, we have 2i and 6i, which means we'll get 8i. C is very similar to part A. We have 3 plus 5 and 4i plus 6i. The 3 plus 5 will give us 8. And the 4i plus 6 will give us 10. D is very similar to part B, so I'm going to multiply the negative into the bracket to begin, and we'll get 7 plus 2i minus 3 minus 5i. Looking at the next part then, we're going to have to add the real parts together, the 7 and the minus 3 and the 2i and the minus 5i. That will leave us with 7 take 3, which is 4, and then 2i minus 5i, which is minus 3i. E is after that, and E is very similar to A and C. So what we have is minus 2 plus 4 minus 3i plus 7i. That will leave us then with minus 2 plus 4, which is 2, and minus 3 plus 7, which is plus 4i. F comes next, and again F is very similar to the one above. We have 8 and minus 3 as our reals, and we have minus 6i and 2i as our imaginary parts. Adding the real parts together, we have 8 minus 3, which will give us 5, and the imaginary parts, we have minus 6 minus 2, which is minus 8i. G, again, we have to look at the bracket to begin with. However, because this is a positive, the positive sign won't change any sign within the bracket. So we'll have 2 minus 3i minus 4i plus I. The real parts then, we have 2 minus 4 and minus 3i plus I in the imaginary, leaving us with the real where we've 2 minus 4, which is minus 2, and minus 3i plus I, which is minus 2i. H, the last part of this question then, we have a bracket which we'll have to get rid of with the negative, multiplying it in. So we'll have minus 5 plus 8i plus 3 plus 6i. Then looking at the real parts and the imaginary parts, we have minus 5 and plus 3 and plus 8i plus 6i. Minus 5 plus 3 will end up with minus 2, and plus 8i plus 6i will end up with 14i. After going through example 4.1, you should be able to add or subtract any complex number from another.